Okay, so in this video we're going to learn how to texture a mesh to give it some character and some detail, and we're going to learn about UV mapping. So first of all, a 3D real-time object is usually quite simple, as you see here with this creature. And it's through the application of good textures that give it a lot of character and detail. So there's an awful lot you can achieve through the texturing alone, and while keeping the 3D mesh data relatively simple. You can see that in old Nintendo 64 games where the meshes are very basic, but the textures are what give the characters a lot of life and bring them to life, really. So we're going to look here just at a cube for the moment, and we're going to UV map this. So within a 3D mesh, when a 3D mesh is saved, it doesn't just save the 3D coordinates that make it up, it also saves something called UV coordinates, which represent where on the 3D model each element is mapped to a 2D texture. So to find the UV information, you need to go up here to UV and open the UV editor, and you get this sort of flat plane, which is where the UV coordinates are represented. So if we go to face select and we hover over any of these faces, we can see where the 3D face is in relation to the UV coordinates. And the UV coordinates themselves can be selected by right-clicking here and going to UV, and you can select those coordinates to move them around. But this wouldn't be any use unless we had some sort of texture to use, or you can also use some of these built-in features here, like display a checkered tile, which gives you, it doesn't add a texture to it, but it just gives you a representation to help you figure stuff out. But let's turn that off, and we'll bring an image in. So I've used Photoshop to create an ugly mess here, and my image is 512 by 512 pixels. You always work in those standard square numbers that you see on computers, like 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, etc., as these are the best numbers to use for a computer's memory, and I won't get into why, but just always when we're texturing we do use square images. And I've just saved this as a Photoshop file because both Unity and Maya can recognize Photoshop files as textures. So to preview the texture here in Maya so that we work on it, we need to apply it to a material. So in object mode, let's just close or minimize that window for the moment. If you right click on your object, you can go down to material attributes here, and it should come up in the attribute editor. If it doesn't come up in the attribute editor, you can find it in one of the tabs that's there. In the color input, this checkered box here, we're going to go and find our file, and I'm going to find it here and bring it onto my cube, and so we can see that that's applied. And let's go back to our UV editor, and you can see how each face represents the 2D image that's in the UV editor. Okay, now so what you can do is you can say we're going to work with this face here. You can actually move those coordinates to display a different part of the image, and it'll affect, well, at the moment it's affecting multiple faces, so it doesn't only affect that one, but it affects the other ones adjacent to it when we move that. Yeah, so you can see how that works. Let's look at the sewing and cutting tools. So not every mesh is as perfect as this cube, and this cube comes pre-set up with this kind of unfolded cube structure, just like when you used to do maths in school and you used to cut out shapes and flatten them, cut out flattened shapes to turn into 3D boxes and stuff. That's kind of the process you're using. You're using this kind of intelligence, 3D intelligence, to map a 3D object to a 2D space as efficiently and as best as you can. If you select UVs, I'm going to just select all of them here, and then I go Tools, Sew UVs, it'll sew them all up. Okay, so I'm just going to select all my UVs and go Polygons, Sew. And what that does is it sews all of the edges back up again so that they're not nice anymore. And I'm just going to turn this shaded view on here, and it shows you that these are all, and you can also turn the image off here, and it shows that all of the faces are red. They're all kind of stacked up on top of each other now because I've sewn all of the, I've kind of folded that box back up, and it's not properly mapped. So so we're kind of basically resetting the UVs again to do it ourselves. And so there are a number of ways you can map an object. So if we select this object here, you can generate a map off automatically by going to UV and then choosing one of these: automatic, best plane, cylindrical, planar, spherical. So you see automatic kind of tries to find the best way to lay out all the faces. And I've turned this on here because it shows me blue faces are single, flat, good faces. But if I say, and here, this one here is the shell select. If I select a shell and move it on top of each other, you can start to see that the colors change to show that bits are stacked on top of each other and that sort of thing. It's not letting me, it's a setting I have to change somewhere. But if it's all wrong, they'll be kind of red. Okay? So we can also go planar, which tries to project it from a single plane, which isn't going to work here because it means it'll just map it from one side, and these will kind of occupy negative space. So we won't use that one. You could also use a sphere, which is a weird way of doing it, which won't work for a cube very well. Kind of tries to imagine that the camera is kind of stretched around here from a sphere shape and organize them that way. It's no good. Or you could use a cylinder, which is similar. We want to do none of those. And we don't want the automatic mapping either. We want to try and achieve what the first map did. So we're going to go UV, and we're going to select them all, and we're going to go Polygons, Sew UV Edges again, to sew them all up. And now we're going to do it ourselves. I'm going to turn off that picture for the moment. Now, the way to start cutting up the faces yourself is actually the easiest way is to go to Edge Select, to click on an edge. You can do this one at a time, or you can select multiple. I'm going to do just one at a time for the moment. It's this first one. Go Polygons, Cut UV Edge. It's going to make a cut in here, in all these faces that have been folded up. And I can't see the effect of my cut until I unfold this again. And this process is a little bit confusing, and you may already be a bit confused. It just takes a little bit of practice to remember all the steps here. So I also can't tell that I've cut the image. So the best way to see that is if we go display polygons border texture border edges, and then display, we might need to select the object and display polygons texture border edges, and then go increase the edge width. I can't see it. Display polygons texture border edges, display polygons, try border edges. Okay, that hasn't worked. Polygons, cut UV, okay, it worked that time. I just had to do it again, and you can see that the areas where I've made a cut, the edges are thicker. They also appear here. So we've made a couple of cuts, like a lid, and you imagine this lid is going to fold off and fold out and fold out here. So the way to unfold once you've cut, so think about it like making how you would actually use paper. You'd make the cuts first and then you unfold. So, and this confused me a lot. I would make the cuts and then I wouldn't see anything here, and it would confuse me and be like, why does this look wrong? It's because you need to select the UVs here, UVs, select all the UVs, and then go polygon, unfold here. And now you can see that this face has unfolded separately to the rest of the faces, and they all still remain sewn together, which is why they look strange. So if I continued to select edges and went polygon, cut, I've now cut this one here. If I unfolded this again, you would see this one detach from the other two. Okay? So let's actually try that now. And you don't have to unfold everything at once. You could say just select those and go polygon, unfold. Okay, it did kind of affect everything, but now that's where the change was made. And so you can keep cutting and unfolding until it looks like the original. So the last place we need to make the cuts are, just think these two on the side, edge, yep, just these two, polygon, cut, and then select all the UVs, polygons, unfold, and there we have our original looking unfolded box. And the other thing I also found confusing, and you'll find confusing, is moving between the selections. So here we're selecting edges to make our cuts, but in here we need to be selecting UVs to make edits to the UVs. So you can't kind of select edges in here, or at least you used to not be able to do it like this. You used to not be able to select an edge and then make a cut. You had to select UVs, and that was often confusing. Now, because all of these faces are still attached, they count as a shell. So this is a shell, move shell tool, and that will let you select all of the bits that are connected, and you can just use your regular rotate and scale tools in here like anything else to move it around. Okay, so that's how it works for a box. And of course, the other thing to know here is that what's confusing for people is this is one vertex which maps to a point on this UV map, but if you think about it, there is multiple UVs to each vertex, because this vertex on the 3D object actually represents both this point here and this point here. So there's actually, for every face has its own 4 sets of UV points, even if they look like they're all together. And that's what's happening when we are cutting and sewing. We're splitting the groups of UVs that belong to different faces and then sewing them back up together. We're joining and splitting, and that's what we're doing here. So now we're going to do it with our mate over here. Okay, so this is a bit more complicated, and I'm going to go back to shaded view, which is number 5 on the keyboard, to do this. At the moment, on this object, it doesn't look right. You can see they're all red, which means that what's happening is, let's kind of have a look here. You can see where everything's kind of assigned. The head, you see how when I hover over this part of the head, it's selecting a flat line? That's like because all of the UVs that represent the different points on this face have kind of been flattened and squashed against each other. So obviously this isn't quite right at the moment. The way I do it is I'm going to select the whole object, and I'm going to go polygons. Sorry, I need to select all the UVs, polygons. I'm just going to sew them all up, turn them back into a mess, and restart this. And what we're going to do is think about this like a animal skin rug. We're going to split the animal down the belly and unfold it so that it flattens into a 2D square. So it's like we're making a rug. Same principle for basically everything else, just we're going to do it to this one animal. So we want to select the edges and start to make cuts under the body. So I'm just going to cut those, and we want to make sure that our mesh display polygons, texture border edges, and then I'm going to make the display polygons, where are we? Edge width is nice and clear. So we know where we're cutting. We're not going to unfold it just yet. So I'm going to just go right up to about there. Polygons, cut. Let's just do up. I'm going to do the whole. Actually, I'm going to stop at the tail for the moment. Cut. Let's just see what happens if I unfold that. So I can select all the UVs, polygons, unfold, and you can see that I've got already a kind of an unfolded version of my creature. But what's happening here is that because it's trying to do it as best as it can, it's taking these legs and squashing them into little kind of complicated condensed areas. Same with the head, it's kind of taking, or I think that might be the tail. I think this is the tail. It's kind of looking at it from here and squashing all that down into one place, which isn't best. So we need to make a couple more incisions to try and liberate some of this detail in here. So I'm going to cut down the legs. Oops. Actually, I'm just going to do them at the same time. Pressed F then just to help me focus on what my selection was. Okay, I've cut those. Let's see what that looks like. it's automatically selecting all of them. Polygons unfold. Okay, I've got something happening here. It's looking a bit strange. Have I made... Why is that uneven? Not sure at the moment. It is equal, it's just for some reason more weighted towards one side. If you can also play with something called like you can unfold like a paintbrush, but that is not good. Let's try. Alright, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to cut out the whole head and make it a separate piece. So to do that, you can just go along here around the whole perimeter and go polygon cut UVs. And what that does, it'll, when we unfold, oops, excuse me, selection tool, grab my UVs, polygons unfold, it'll move the head, that looks a bit better, move the head to a different kind of section. You can, and you see that's a separate, counts as a separate shell, so you can right click here and go shell, and it will select a whole piece that's disconnected from the other. So I can work, if I wanted to have less detail on the body, I could shrink that whole section, and I could, if I wanted more detail on the head, I could bring that up bigger and focus more on that area in my drawing. I would want to have the ears coming out, so I could cut up there. And then unfold this shell. So now there's a better kind of representation of the head, a bit more flat. It does mean that the nose is quite small there, but what you could do is go in, say select just the outside edges, and you could go in here and scale them up if you wanted to have lots of detail on the nose and less on the snout. So you can do that sort of thing. I'm just a bit confused as to why this isn't perfectly symmetrical. Usually when I do it, this is perfectly symmetrical, but oh well, it's 10:43 PM. I'm not going to be able to go all the way back and figure that out right now. Let's go polygons. Let's cut those as well. We're going to have a weird tail bit. Maybe just 1, 2 there as well. Shell. And unfold the shell. Ah, there we go, that's done it. And basically that's it. That'll do. What you want to think about when you're cutting up this is probably the most annoying part of making a 3D model is this. It's the most time consuming, especially if you have a complicated mesh. But what you want to do is, especially if you're using a tiled texture or a pattern, you need to have these, what are they called, the seams, where the cuts are made in the least visible parts of the body. So on this area where most of the visible content will be is where you don't want to make your cuts. You want to make all the cuts kind of underneath and in the joins, around, like under the arms, at the back of the head, those sort of places where they won't be visible. And I'm just going to just arrange these. You try and arrange them in the best way that'll help you draw. So it might even be better to take the tail out here. I'm going to actually do that. I'm going to cut around here. Double click to select the whole edge loop. And then select this shell. Oh, now it's a separate shell. Unfold that shell. Now I can move that up into the corner. Alright. Now, you don't always have to work exactly this way. If, for example, this was mirrored, both sides were exactly the same, you could say cut right along, say, the back. I'm going to undo this, but you could cut all along there. You could get that shell. You could invert it and stack it right on top of there, and those two pieces would use the same image data. You can see it's gone red, but you can do things like that where if those two sides are using exactly the same image data, you can stack them on top of each other and they'll use the same parts of the image. But we're not going to do that. Same as if say all of this tail was going to be black, I could get this whole shell, shrink it really tiny, and put it on a black bit of the image, and that all of those faces would be the same color. So think about how to best utilize this space for what you want. So say if this whole body and the tail together were one color, I could take both of these, make them really small, and then only work on the head, for example. You need to undo all of that. Now the other thing here is you're only using this section of the UV map, and anything that doesn't have a face on it won't be seen. So if I draw something up in this corner, it won't be seen on the mesh. Anyway, let's bring this map into Photoshop to work on. So we need to actually select the object here. If you don't select the object, this won't work. Another kind of little process that's really frustrating and sometimes confuses people. You have to select the whole object, go to Polygons, UV Snapshot. You get a dialog box. Let's make it 512 by 512. I'm going to save that onto my project. My assets. I've made a folder called Textures in my Unity project. We're going to save that as animal skin, and the image format I'm going to choose PNG because I'm just used to using PNG, and I'm going to go OK, and that should have actually saved a file for us to open. Let's go open animal skin, and we've got it in Photoshop ready to use. Now I'm going to make it layer underneath. I'm not going to make a beautiful picture. You can experiment with that yourselves. Let's make that white. You can turn this on and off to see the map. I always turn my navigator on when I'm working in Photoshop. And so if you have your kind of map on the top layer and on the bottom layer is where you work, say I'm going to make an eye here and an eye there, and I'm going to make some pink in the ears, and I'm going to have a pink nose, and oops, no, it's going to have a piggy nose and a silly mouth and I'm going to have a swirly here and zigzag here, and you know, you can go into Google Images and go fur texture. You could download that texture, say let's save save image as, and put that into my tutorial project. So put in textures, that'll do, and then place that my fur texture as I might rotate, put that on a lower layer. Oh, of course, I can just set that to multiply for the moment. Just I shouldn't have made that all white, but anyway. And before I save this, I'm not going to delete the layer. I am just going to save this as a Photoshop file. I'm going to call it Animal Skin Photoshop. And now, back in Maya, let's turn our textured view on with 6. Let's go right click, assign new material. We're going to choose Lambert again. We're going to click on the color input and select PSD file. Let's select the animal skin, and you can see that to some degree I've been accurate with where it goes on the model, and you can see it there now. Don't worry about this weird transparent effect that's happening. We're going to move all this into Unity, and that won't be there. So there you have a poorly textured animal, but at least the fur looks kind of cool. And it's sometimes a bit of guess and check with the texturing. Let's save this into Unity now. So let's go File, Export Selection, FBX Export, Tutorial Project, Assets, Meshes. I'm going to call it Textured Animal, and save it out there. So remember that when you're saving that mesh out, it's saving this UV coordinate system with it. So if you haven't done this and you've saved this out, your images won't look right when you apply them in Unity. So let's go into Unity. We've got our mesh here. Here's our textured animal. Let's bring up the scale factor of the import. There it is. And you can see it in here. Actually, that also has that weird transparent thing happening. I'm going to have to look up what's going on there. There it is. It might be a problem with the Maya shader. So we need to. You can see that Unity's created an automatic material that comes with this object. But to make a new one, I've made a separate materials folder. You can always go here and go right click, create material. We'll call this fur, and you, of course, to apply that to something, you can just drag it on. You can always change the color here, but this color will show through any texture that you put on it, so just keep it white. You can, so albedo basically means color, and you can put a file here where this box is by clicking on this little circle, select animal skin, and you see it appear. And I was right, it was a problem with the imported Maya texture that made that transparent. So if you have that problem, just make a new material. we're not using any Maya materials. Every material we're going to use is done from Unity. So I've got my new material called fur, and that's applied to the object, and to check you can click on here and see it in the inspector, and you can also change it from here. And of course, yeah, if you change the color, it mixes it with the main texture. So that I'm just going to keep it white. You can change how metallic the texture is and how shiny and reflective it is. If it's really smooth, you see how it's reflecting the environment. So that's really cool if you want to make like a nice sort of porcelain glazed look. And normal maps we're going to do in another video. You can also tile, change how the image is tiled and how many times it tiles. So it's tiling that 14 times, and apply offsets and stuff. The other thing you can do is, say I want to have a transparent part of that image. You could just get your eraser. I need to rasterize this layer, and you could draw a big thing through that, and then oh, that's not going to work, because let me just turn that one off for the moment. Make a big transparent area, save your PSD file, and this is saving directly into the Unity thing, into the Unity project. You can see that that's all white, but you can actually change this to, where are we, a transparent shader. So the shader at the moment is the standard. You could go shader, there's many different ones you could choose. For example, a particle shader's usually got some transparent ones. Where are we? Alpha blended is always transparent, but that's no good because it's kind of double. So you just sort of go through these. I definitely know that there are some legacy shaders that work in the transparent section. Diffuse transparent. You can see that the area that is transparent in the Photoshop file is now transparent on the object itself. I'm sure there's a better one. In fact, I'm sure that there was an option in here somewhere for that to happen. Albedo. Ah, here we go. Sorry, it's in rendering mode of the standard shader. Go transparent. Still gives it a kind of a. It's good for glass. That gives it a kind of a. It's transparent, but it still picks up the shine as if there's something there. I think if we turn down the smoothness, that would maybe disappear. Anyway, just have a play around with all those materials. You can see that even affects it, the shadow, which is cool. So back on the point of the Photoshop file, the reason I'm using Photoshop files is that I can have all of the working data, see the map and the different layers I'm working on, stored within the same file, and I can save that and have it immediately update in here, as that's the file that it's using, without having to constantly save out JPEGs or every time. So it just uses the one file. I'm just thinking if there's anything else for the moment. I mean, the other thing you can do is any image that you save in your textures, you can drag them straight onto objects, and that makes it really easy to start texturing your scene. So have a play around with that. We're going to do all the reflection stuff and look at lighting in another tutorial. I think that is it for now. I don't think there's anything else I need to say about UV maps. It's pretty much just that. I mean, you can go back in here, and if you want to sew things up again, you can select some UVs and go like sew, and it will sew them up. But I mean, so if you want to do some really fine work, you have to kind of do things like that. You know, you can also try out the different automatic maps on this kind of object, but you know, it's better to do it like this. But if you're in a hurry, or say there's an object you're making that's all from the front, and you don't really even need to bother about the rest, you could just do like a planar map or something and kind of get it over and done with really quickly. Okay, that is the tutorial. And of course, if you're in my class, you're just going to work on doing your own and putting more effort into the paintings. And of course, what I did, I just did that as an example. Alright, that's it.